So once again, welcome. This evening we will celebrate Professor Sabapathy, John, as a wonderful scholar. We will be able to do this also through the specific structure of the evening, with an intro and an outro performed by two other wonderful scholars, Professor Alice Taylor from King's College London, who will introduce John's lecture, and Professor John Arnold from the University of Cambridge, who will provide some concluding remarks at the end of it. Inaugural lectures are very important occasions in the life of a university department. They're obviously very important for the person delivering the lecture, which marks a pivotal moment in their career, one that is at the same time highly symbolic and very real. They're important for the department as a community because we celebrate the success of one of us. We also welcome colleagues from outside. We welcome our colleagues' former mentors. We welcome their family and their friends. The occasion is important for them too. Former mentors, I'm sure, will see their intuition confirmed. Family and friends share the joy and pride, and perhaps finally realize that all those "I have to go to the library" did mean something in the end. The occasion is also important for those who introduce the lecture and comment on it, because they have the chance to enjoy retracing their colleagues' intellectual journey. They have the chance to find the dots and join them. But inaugural lectures are also important for all of us, because they are a powerful reminder of the fact that, just like Ernest Kantorowicz's Kings, academics have also two bodies. One is what I am sure a theorist like Plowden would have called the body scholarly, their contribution to the advancement of their discipline, their conference and research projects, their articles and books. All those things that shine under the bright lights of ref success and academic prizes. As for the other one, Plowden would have probably called it the body collegiate. That is to say, their daily, often routine activity as members of a community, their interaction with students and colleagues, their performance of administrative and pastoral duties, their presence and leadership in the nitty-gritty activities of a university department. So just while we are preparing to celebrate John as a wonderful scholar, I would like to emphasize how wonderful he is also as a member of our departmental community, since he joined us as a PhD student first, and then since 2010 as a member of staff after having been BA undergraduate student at Oxford and also JRF at Oxford as well. His dedication to our students, from undergraduate to MA and PhD, has always been exemplary. The originality of his courses, from the invention of the question to emergency history, is legendary. His compassion and dedication in accepting a whole range of departmental responsibilities, from admissions tutor to director of research, are truly inspiring. His ability to be physically present in the department and at the same time champion our discipline on all sorts of stages, from the faculty to UCL at large and beyond, is mesmerizing. But if I may add a personal note, as head of department, what I perhaps treasure above all are the chats that John and I exchange in the corridors, the coffees we spend talking about family and the Anthropocene, about medieval popes and jurists. The distinct feeling I have that being able to count John, Professor Sabapathy, as one of my colleagues is one of the things that make what Jack Kerouac would have called the forlorn rags of heading a department a little less forlorn, a little less lonely. Don't get me wrong, they're still rags. Not even John can perform miracles, although knowing him, I'm sure he's working on that. So from me, and on behalf of all the department, thank you, Professor Sabapathy, and well done. And it is now a real pleasure and an honor for me to welcome Professor Alice Taylor from King's College London and ask her to introduce formally Professor John Sabapathy's inaugural lecture. Alice, over to you.
First of all, can you all hear me? Great. So in 2020, John and Antonia Fitzpatrick edited a really wonderful collection of essays entitled Individuals in Institutions in Medieval Scholasticism. And in their introduction, they asked the reader a potentially revealing question. What is one interested in? And this one might think is a rather bold question to ask, particularly in a volume which has the words medieval and scholasticism in the title. But it is fundamentally the question which motivates most of our lives. What are we interested in? What do we care about knowing? So in this introduction, I'd like to turn the question around from what one is interested in to what John is interested in, and why it matters so much for how we understand the function of history and historical inquiry. So what is John interested in? And first, and perhaps unsurprisingly for a university professor, he has long been interested in institutions, the subject which motivated his first prize-winning book, Officers and Accountability in Medieval England. What difference, he asks, do institutions and the institutional cultures of office holding make to the way human beings behave, to what they can do and how they do it? What do institutions and the process of institutionalization mean for society as a whole? What do they limit? What do they enable? And how do institutions quite literally create new worlds? And at the start of an essay on the English Master of Theology, Robert of Courson, who died in 1219, John speculates on what he might have thought and what he might have recalled at the moment of his death. Did he recall the institutional forms he had helped bring about, maintain, and bring down, from councils to crusades to preaching, and what did he think of them? And the second foundational issue in John's work therefore follows on from the first. What about the people who live within, maintain, and change institutions? What do they think they are doing? How do they worry about it? And how do they maintain and challenge the worlds they live in? Now, John has used the Central and later Middle Ages as a kind of laboratory to think through these questions. The 12th and 14th centuries have been the chronological field in which he poses questions about how and why people do what they do and think what they think. In Officers and Accountability, he effectively challenges much longer-standing narratives about why histories of institutions matter and why we should write them. He sees institutions as social and sociological phenomena, and in so doing, his work frees us from thinking about them only in the context of narratives that were formed in and were necessary to very different eras, the triumph of Protestantism, for example, or the rise of the modern state. John's Middle Ages, therefore, contain cannibals, masters of theology, rules about dining in universities, sheriffs, counters on the exchequer table, owls and wolves, dreams and inquests, sometimes even dreams about inquests. His is very, very far from the Middle Ages, regularly popularized in historical novels and the fantastical projection of the medieval, that is, Game of Thrones. So the ultimate motivation, it seems, behind John's work has been to engage with this fundamental question. What are the forces that bend people's history? And here I'm paraphrasing one of his wonderful essays. And in the first and earlier strand of work, his answer to that has been to focus on institutions as these shaping forces, how the social processes behind them rise, change, and fall away. But his more recent strand of work on the Anthropocene reveals other key forces which are preoccupying him more and more. In his really beautiful essay on time, COVID, and the Anthropocene, written in those bizarre days of April 2020, John writes that, "Today we find that the power bending time is not human, but viral, and it is only one of many actors." And here we have the potential for the truly non-modern, or rather non-modernist form of history, which displaces humans as the primary, or rather only, historical force in the world. The chronological challenge implicit in John's work is that history is not equivalent to linear chronology, the idea that one thing leads to another, or, as Rudge put it in Alan Bennett's History Boys, one damn thing after another. Instead of providing us with origin stories, John's work forces us to see history as an endless site of interrogation, of interrogating our own basic assumptions about what we do. And by we, he means human selves not merely as individuals, not merely as groups, not merely as incorporated institutions, but instead as emerging from those grey spaces betwixt and between all three. His work forces us to interrogate more deeply, more creatively, about what we humans do and have done to the world, and what the world does and has done to us. It is a very great pleasure and a very great privilege to introduce Professor John Sabapathy at his inaugural lecture, entitled Goodbye Cockaigne, Working, Eating and Laughing in the Anthropocene.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. It's a great pleasure, and I feel very honoured that you've all made the effort to come out on such a freezing day. It's an enormous pleasure, in particular, to be welcomed, to be introduced by my academic older brother, my only very slightly younger academic sister, and then to have one of my academic fairy godfathers to round things up for us. There are some thanks I would like to give. Many of the people who I'd like to thank are here in the room, but some of them are not, and not all of them are on that list behind me, which I shan't read out. Academics are very good at complaining about their jobs, but our vocation can hardly be described as an accidental one. There are, however, members around us and people who support us who are the innocent victims, the innocent bystanders of our vocational choices. We at least get the chance to stand up every so often and be kindly appreciated through the excessive generosity of the words, such as you've already heard, but they far less frequently get any acknowledgement of the role they play in enabling us to do this. And all of you, many of you are academics, all of you know this from your own lives. So I would like to ask you to indulge me and ask you to applaud my family, without whom I could not do this. I now need to sort of zone them out, otherwise I won't get through the rest of it. An inaugural, I take it, is supposed to inaugurate something, but it's also supposed to say something about where you've kind of come from. What I will do is divide things into the past, present, and future in that respect. UCL typically has some guidelines about how we should give our inaugurals, and I have already done two bad things in choosing the title of this inaugural. The first, the two bad things, of course, are inserting two words in it that no one really understands. Cockaigne and the Anthropocene. My French colleagues tell me I really, really cannot pronounce it Cockaigne, so I will Francisize, Frenchify my pronunciation to a slightly absurd degree. So let me just say a little bit about the Anthropocene, and then I'll get on to talking about the past. The Anthropocene is this idea that we are now no longer in the Holocene, but in the age of the human. The idea that we are now, as a species, such powerful actors on the planet that we register as geological agents at a global scale. And work has been going on into this for several years now. I'm very fortunate that the secretary of the Anthropocene Working Group is here. And this is where they have suggested collectively that we should measure the age of the human from a surprisingly bucolic picture you might think. It's here in southern Canada, in the Great Lakes. And Crawford Lake is unusual for various chemical reasons, in particular the nature of the base of the lake, which remains very undisturbed from the upper layer, and means that it provides an extraordinary repository and sort of measuring system for the various chemical deposits that allow us to see the Anthropocene in motion. This lake will only fill up in 30,000 years' time, so it's a sort of living time capsule, both of the past and forwards to the future. And the rationale for choosing the Crawford site is in particular for its plutonium and fly ash sediments that are extremely well calibrated in the bottom layer. The Anthropocene Working Group took the decision of the 12 sites that it was looking at as potential candidate sites for measuring the Anthropocene from, took the decision to locate the Anthropocene in all of those different sites that it was potentially looking at as the point from which we measure it from, in and around the middle of the 20th century. That's a decision that there has been some criticism of, and that's something we can think about. We could think about more in greater detail. I'm not particularly going to go into the whys and wherefores of that. But what I do want to do is to use that as a basis to think about what it means to think about the Anthropocene as an idea and as a phenomena in a more historical period. Plainly, to measure the Anthropocene from 1950 is to take, as it were, a hypermodern point of view about what and when matters, or it certainly implies an answer to that question. I, by contrast, as a historian, am going to suggest that understanding, let alone addressing the Anthropocene, needs long views. And that the views in question that we need to take are not only about the technologies that produce the plutonium, the spheroidal carbon particles, the fly ash that we tell the Anthropocene has happened by, but also the human fantasies of superfluity and the desires that have fueled it. As I'll go on to show, the fantasies of Cockaigne demonstrate they have fueled it for a very long time indeed. And I'll conclude by suggesting that those sorts of histories raise questions about what the role, if any, history as a discipline could play in addressing the Anthropocene. So this is work in progress. This is something I've been thinking. I started thinking about specifically when I needed to give this lecture. So you're getting something that's a kind of live, organic, mutating thing in front of you. So my apologies if it's not as sort of finely honed as something that's been through the sausage machine several times over. So as I say, I'm going to work from pasts to presents to futures. And what I want to start by doing is thinking about the successive versions of Cockaigne that we have. This is an imaginary land, a fantastical land, and a land which seems to arise not necessarily out of scholarly ideas or games, although its end may arguably get caught up in those, but seems to exist at some sort of a popular level. So let me start by looking at the earliest sort of substantive version of Cockaigne that we have. All of these different versions of Cockaigne are just the fragments that are left to us. It's been suggested there are lots more that no longer survive. But I'm going to sort of suggest that they're interestingly different. And while the difference is not necessarily significant chronologically, we might want to, we could think about that. So I'll roll through these successively. Let me start then with the earliest, a very short 200-odd line text in in an extremely important manuscript for early French literature in Paris now, and that will allow me to sort of sketch out for you what the contents of this imagined fantastical land were. This is a world in which you do not need to work. It's a world that God appears to have blessed, in which the more you sleep, the more you earn. An economy turned upside down. An economy in which, nevertheless, there are goods and services. There are tailors who are happy to provide you with whatever the clothes are you might need, with no apparent restrictions on the material needed to do it. It's a world of infinite pleasure, where promiscuity is a source of honour, where the women are so lovely that everyone can take whomever they fancy, and the more sex you have, the greater the honours you receive in this land. Interestingly, it's also a world in which female pleasure is attended to and is thought of. Although my colleague Jane Gilbert thinks this is a rather second-hand thought on the mind of the poet. It's a world that has an interestingly apolitical politics. It's only 200 lines, but there are some interesting hints here. Purses litter the sides of the road with their sovereigns and crowns, but nobody does any buying or selling. The reciprocal exchange of any economy appears to have totally dissolved. But interestingly, there is no moralizing around this behaviour. On the contrary, the poet suggests that the abundance of this world does not produce any sort of degenerate behaviour, but rather courteousness. The people there are courteous and they're noble, not at all coarse. There's an interesting idea about the way in which the climate of this land also seems to generate good behaviour. Every day it's lovely like May, and everything is shared amongst the people there. There is never wars nor battles. The earth's at peace every day. I'll come back to this question of climate later. One of the most interesting things, it seems to me, about the world, and it's the most famous aspect of it, is its ecology. But even although it's the most famous aspect of this world, it's also, in a sense, the least examined of it, because no one has actually thought about this space as an environmental space. Because the most famous aspect of this world is that it's made of food. This is an entirely organic world that is processed for human consumption. The rafters are made of sturgeons, the walls are made of bass, salmon and shad. Along the streets, by their own volition, go turning the wild, the fat geese turning. This is a world that wants to be eaten. It brings another meaning to the idea of sort of organic food. Interestingly, it's also a world, and this we need to think about for a second, it's also a world where metabolisms appear to be static. Nothing grows, or nothing grows by implication, because no one gets old in there. There's a fountain of youth, which means that however old you are, however young you are, you'll stay at the sort of acme of youthfulness. They are made young again, those who live in that land, the poet says. So we can view this poem as a kind of critique, I'd suggest, as a critique of the existing world of the of the mid-13th century, where only so many people are able to be fed, where only certain sorts of people have access to certain sorts of food, where only the wealthy can wear the elaborate clothing that is talked about. It also seems to me to be a rejection of the moralizing theology dominant in that period in relation to sex and things like this. So it seems an interestingly critical poem, even in its humorous and fantastical nature. Let me turn to the second of the chronological Cockagnes I want to explore, a version which is in Hiberno English, again in a manuscript just across the road, if anyone of us could get to the British Library, which is, again, not about the same length, but interestingly different. And here, that critical world has shifted into a more satirical level. It's also shifted into an institutional level, whereas in the French Cockaigne, there are no institutions at all. In the Irish Cockaigne, the setting is a satirized abbey. It's possible. It smells really strongly of Franciscans. This manuscript, but precisely what is going on in the text in relation to different orders is not entirely clear. But it's set in an abbey, and again satirizing the idea of paradise. What is there in paradise but grass, flowers, and leaves? Here again, the walls are made of pies, etc., etc. There is no labour again. There's an interesting idea that there are no beasts of burden or animals of the field that one would encounter. There are no predators either. It's interesting to think about the list of animals that there aren't there. One of the most interesting aspects of this text on Cockaigne, though, is the way in which it thinks about the bestialization, the animalization of the human in the context of the affluence and the sufficiency they have. The image that the poem offers us of the monks is of birds flapping around. You need to imagine their sort of their robes flapping as they fly up. There is no hawk nor bird so swift in the sky whose flight's as fast as those playful monks. But they're also non-verbal, instinctive animals who will not listen to the abbot when he calls them down to come to evensong. So the abbot is reduced in the poem's most sexually explicit moment to taking a girl off the side of the road, turning her backside up, and on her drums, on her buttocks, beating them like drums in order to get the monks to come down. And it's that. It's only that, like ringing the bell for the cows to come home in the evening. It's only that brings them down. So there's also an idea that the humans in this institution, because of the easy resources they have to hand, have been turned into something else, and even promotion in the abbey seems to be a function of sexual prowess that's again put in quite animalistic terms. So if that is Cockaigne as satire, if we shift further along, and there are several iterations I'm going to miss out here, but if we shift further along to the mid-16th century and some of the Dutch versions, we find this world as a place of simple, open mockery. We've gone from sleeping to work as a sort of fantasy to farting as working. This fantasy is being openly ridiculed in this Dutch prose version. The louder you fart, the more you get paid. Although, what is money doing in this economy? One might ask. Those who become indebted, are sent to a corner of the country where they're forced to eat roast chicken and white bread as a terrible punishment. And in very clear contrast to the French Cockaigne, Here, the emphasis is not on the courteousness generated by this plenty, but on the contrary, to the fact that everyone is here as a function of them being miscreants and having turned their back on honour and virtue. Anyone who is wise and sensible is scorned and despised and treated badly by everyone. And the person who is the worst of all, the most debauched vagabond and champion rogue, such a person is proclaimed king, very differently to any leaders of countries that we might have come across over recent years. So you have open mockery of this world in this Dutch version. I want to finish this sort of review of Cockaign's pasts and the sort of this more historical exploration by pausing on what to my mind is the most interesting, the richest, and the most ambiguous version of Cockaigne, which is a painting in Munich by the great Bravantine painter Peter Bruegel from 1567. So very near to that prose version, and it's clear there are specific things in the painting. I won't go into them. There are specific things in the painting that make it very clear that there is a connection between that text and Bruegel. Because this seems to me to be Cockaigne rethought, a Cockaigne that's more similar perhaps to the original, or not the original, the earliest version that we have to substantively survive. And Bruegel's Cockaigne is, I think, as interesting for its absences as well as for the things that are in it. This is a painting after satisfaction. This is a painting that does not depict the pleasures of Cockaigne, but it depicts, the sort of post-coital, if you like, moment of, well, whatever it is. I'll think about that in a second. But Bruegel very clearly avoids the sorts of images of pleasure and consumption that he was a brilliant painter of. So what was he trying to do in it? If it's more complicated perhaps than some of its most recent antecedents. It's been suggested that the compositional structure of the painting is drawn from this etching by Peter Baltons, or the scholarly argument about this. But I think that case holds. So does Baltons's engraving help us to understand what Bruegel might have been trying to get at or do in his painting of Cockaigne? Helpfully, Baltons's engraving has a text, and it too, like the Dutch prose text, takes a very clearly disparaging and censorious attitude towards Cockaigne. Come all you lasers from ever far. Traces of Mr. Gum here, I've often thought, actually, John. Everyone who's fat, lazy and gluttonous all make their way there. We also have an engraving done after Bruegel's painting, and it too has an engraving, a text, which says, "Whoever is gluttonous and lazy, peasant, soldier or clerk, goes there to eat their fill without needing to work. The fences are sausages, the houses made of tarts, capons and chickens fly by, ready and roasted." Now, I think, so this is clearly censorious and judgmental, but I'm not sure it really goes to the heart of what Bruegel is trying to do in the painting. I think it's very clear that just on the basis of the compositional elegance, if you like, of Bruegel's painting, that it must post-date Baltons' engraving. This is quite messy, if you like. This is much more. This is much cleaner and more organised. It seems much more complicated to think they go the other way around. Surely Baltons would have finessed or drawn on perhaps a much stronger, cleaner compositional structure. The text, though, on the Bruegel engraving, which stresses peasant, soldier, or clerk, picks out specifically something that Bruegel has added to the tradition of Cockaigne. That is the medieval idea of the three orders, those who work, those who pray, and those who fight. Long-standing both visual tradition and iconographical, but also ideological tradition that was played with in very, very different ways to very, very different ends for a long, long period in the Middle Ages. Here you've got an early 12th century manuscript in which King Henry I is having a nightmare. We're not really sure what he's having a nightmare about. It's probably taxes. And he's being threatened by, in this image from the manuscript, from John's College, actually, those who plough and those who fight. So it seems to me that Bruegel is doing something a little bit more interesting and sophisticated in this painting. He seems to be suggesting that excess and the satisfaction of wants in some way undoes the social order and everyone's meaning and purpose. They're like you have the knight, you have the peasant, you have the clerk, all lying prostrate, in the peasant's case, on his flail. The knight's lance lies useless. The scholar is not taking proper care of his books. The excessive consumption provided effortlessly in Cockaigne seems to be undoing the social order here. In the context of later 16th century Flanders, in the context of the extraordinary powerhouses that were Brussels, in particular Antwerp, where Bruegel had worked for a very long time before moving to Brussels, where he painted this painting, therefore seems to be asking a question not so much about a nostalgic past as about the future of social order in the Low Countries. What happens to a feudal world that has been predicated on this social structure when no one wants anything anymore? If that is what Cockaigne provides. Although reading the German ideology with my students, some of my students this week, and Marxist theory that need begets need begets need begets need might make us wonder whether Bruegel has got the correct interpretation of what need does here. In any case, the satisfaction of needs does. In any case, he seems to be asking a more interesting question. There also seems to be interesting implications in the painting about the relationship between the human and the non-human, the human and the natural. On the one hand, this is a world in which the geese lie down in order to be eaten, where the cactus bread plant sprouts in order to be eaten, where the natural world has already been absorbed and assimilated into human desire. But it also seems to be a world where the humans are being absorbed into the natural world. There's a bird flying into this knight's mouth that you can't see, but he looks like nothing more than a dog in a kennel. It's always seemed to me. And there's something interesting too about the scholar's robes, which seem to be merging into the grass of the hillside that he's lying on. There's something very thoughtful about the way in which Bruegel is thinking about the relationship between the human and the natural here. There's also something disturbing, I think, about the metabolisms on display here. There's no allusion to the fountain of eternal life, but we are presented with these disturbing images, in many ways more disturbing than the more sort of over-the-top images of someone like Bruegel's predecessor, Hieronymus Bosch, or indeed some of Bruegel's other paintings. This is the walking boiled egg. At one level, an object of fertility, the ovum, but here kind of monstrous and already cooked and therefore sterile. How on earth does the cooked pig with its holster knife reproduce? How does the bread pollinate itself? In manifesting these ideas which are in the text, in manifesting them visually, Bruegel also makes us ask questions about how this natural world operates, it seems to me. There's a sort of monstrous fertility that's only apparently, I think, contradictory to the sterility of these images here, in that this is in contrast to earlier medieval ideas about God being the one who's only truly sufficient and nature being deficient, in the words of an earlier 12th century thinker, Alan and Leal. This is a world in which nature is endlessly prolific, in contrast to those earlier ideas. So it's interesting to think about, kind of how one should, this is an uncomfortable picture the longer you start to look at it, it seems to me. And that brings me to the final absence in Bruegel's Cockaigne, which is laughter. This entire tradition is predicated on making you laugh, on you being amused by the endless fertility and the japes that are going on in it. But laughter is not what seems to me to animate the face of the scholar lying down on the ground. Rather, he seems, I think it would be too much to project on an image of existential despair onto him, but he does not seem to be very happy. It's an interesting question to ask, again, what's going through the mind of only one of them is actually asleep. The peasant and the clerk are awake. The knight is the only one asleep. But it's interesting to think about what he is thinking about as he wakes, presumably from his slumber. So in that respect, again, there is a contrast with Bruegel's many other paintings in which he depicts humorous scenes and paintings that are supposed to make us laugh. It's not so clear to me that is the case here. So there is an ambiguity that contemporaries would have recognised about whether this is a painting in the serious mode or in the comic mode. It seems to me to be both, and to be using in a very pre-modern way humour to ask serious questions. Bakhtin, in his book on Rabelais, talks about this being a distinctively Renaissance thing. It does not, as I think the earlier versions of this tradition, I hope, have already shown you, that it doesn't. I don't think we need to think that that's a distinctively Renaissance thing. Humour is being used here to ask very serious questions, and that seems to be a tradition that is worth recovering. Thinking about how humour can produce insight like this. So let me move on to the final parts of this lecture, and to bring the conversation into the present. It's been suggested that in one of the best the books, particularly on the Dutch tradition by Herman Fleich, that Cockaigne is a depreciated cultural asset. The original publication was 1997. Cockaigne and the Dutch version, Lazy Luscious Land, Lule Lekker Land, I don't know. I'm doing my best. Ben Kaplan has corrected me on some of my Dutch pronunciation, but that's as best as I can do, have continued to decline in importance as ideas and images. They became superfluous when their central concerns lost their topicality and urgency. Increased control of the food supply, a more accessible job market, and a universally accepted work ethic have caused a corresponding decrease in the fears and frustrations surrounding food and work. I don't know what it says about the passage from 1997 to now that those comments, I think, easily seem to us no longer recognisable. In fact, it seems to me that one could even think about this tradition in some respects, or in some versions of it, as the desire for the Anthropocene before anyone had ever thought of that word, before anyone had ever put it into a conceptual package. This is a world that has been rendered human, where the organic matter where the organic machine of the world has been rendered entirely for our benefit. And I use the word render in the technical sense of meat processing in that context. And again, one should take seriously the climate in Bruegel's painting, since we know how attentive, we can see how attentive he was to the relationships between climate, labour, and nature. Indeed, one could even go so far as to suggest that this is an image of the good Anthropocene, that some historians, some scientists have suggested we could make the best of a bad job in terms of using the power we have created to mark the Earth geologically, to do that better for our own good. Insofar as there is an image in the texts of how an abundant nature fuels civility, at least in some of the traditions, and again of the ways in which behaviour is produced by particular climates. And that again is something that in which the medieval might appear to be disturbingly modern. If we think about someone that Amanda's there, that Amanda Power has thought very hard about, the very peculiar thought of Roger Bacon, the Franciscan scientist Roger Bacon, who imagined in advice he gave to popes, and imagined in a text that is framed as coming from Aristotle advising the Emperor Alexander, about how Alexander could intervene in the climate to change it, in order to change the climate, in order to change the nature of the customs and the mores of the people that he wished to conquer, and that if he couldn't change it through scientific means, then he should simply kill them. So the Cockaigne tradition is odd, is disturbing in this way, and so it seems to me to be no surprise that historians have been unsure about which direction it points in, whether it points backwards to some lost image of a golden age, or whether it points forwards to more utopian thinking. We might wonder whether it points forwards to utopian thinking or forwards to dystopian thinking, if we think back to the recent interview, if that's the right word for it, that occurred between the Prime Minister and the richest man on the planet. This idea that if we don't need to work, then we will simply work in order to generate meaning is not the idea of what happens when your needs are satisfied that the Cockaigne tradition offers.
Be very humane.
So, modern images of elements that are contained within the medieval Cockaigne tradition might make us wonder whether, in fact, we have always been Cockaignens in some respects. This is an image from a restaurant that recently opened in London that I owe to Florence Sutcliffe Braithwaite's good graces. Yet, of course, we know that the images of the Cockaigne tradition bear a cost in terms of their resources and in terms of the broader planetary effects that they have that makes them unsustainable. Although I read today that the meat industry is going to make a strong play about how sustainable meat is at the COP summit that is about to start. But we know we can't re-enter that fantasy of Cockaigne, and in fact, in exactly the same way as the speaker of the Cockaigne text, in the French example, for instance, who is telling the reader or the listener about this fantastical land that he's visited, bemoans the fact that having left it to go and find his friends and to bring them in there, he can no longer find the path or the way back in. So in some respects, we do indeed have to say goodbye to Cockaigne. but not, I don't think, the impulse of irreverent, imaginative thinking that it offered about alternative realities, nor about the basic yearning for the most fundamental utopian aspiration to be fed, to have enough to eat. So it might be better perhaps to say au revoir to Cockaigne, to think about what we might be able to usefully recover from that tradition. And it's perhaps, I think it's particularly important in a moment when we are coming out of the aftermath, we hope, of the most extraordinary period of the last few years with the pandemic, that alongside the extraordinary utopian, as it were, inversions and reversals that we actually saw physically, we have very much gone back to a world in which the political imaginations, or our political imaginations, seem to have been in no way invigorated or opened up by those possibilities. We seem to have an extraordinarily sterility of political imaginations, even having seen the different ways of doing things that were possible in no short order at all. So, finally, to conclude briefly, where does that leave the future? Where does that leave the job of history? What, might we ask the muse of history, Cleo, is the so what, as I often want to ask my doctoral students of. And it's interesting when you think about, Latour was not a historian, but he took a very historically sort of orientated framing here. And Gregory Clace is a historian and works through in this book a sequence of utopian desires. And both of them at the ends of these books think about practically what the ramifications, the effects are of their historical analysis for practical action in the present. And it's in reading the ends of both of these books where they try to offer practical solutions or recommendations that one feels their disciplinary shaping really under strain. We are not trained to answer those questions. We're not trained to even ask those questions. It may feel, I promised my children various Easter eggs, this is one of the Easter eggs. It may feel that, as in certain computer games, you've got to as far as you can go asking the questions you want to ask. Lucien Febvre, the great French historian, asked a not dissimilar question in the aftermath of the First World War when he gave his first series of lectures back again in Strasbourg. And he asked, do I have the right, given the state of the world, to teach history? Do I have the right to speak to you like this? It's not the lettered, the learned, or historians that we need, but practical men, experts, engineers, technicians, manufacturers, etc., etc. And then he offered the rhetorical answer, well, maybe history, in particular modern history, maybe that offers its own justification in terms of the national usefulness it provides a people or a nation in telling stories about themselves and where they have come from. Febvre then rejected the answer he himself was toying with. The history that serves is a servile history, he famously wrote. We do not carry the truth locked about in our luggage. We look for it. History is a science. It is not a prosecutorial game. That would then seem to say there are sharp limits to what it is we can do as historians. I've always been rather struck by the motto that my children's school has, that it aims to offer an education to understand the world and to change it for the better. This seems to me to be a very good motto, but what it means in practice is actually quite complicated. It's very appropriate that I should finish, product as I am of one of the distinguished historians in the room, it's very appropriate I should finish with Max Weber in this respect. Weber suggested one had to keep politics and knowledge apart. And Wendy Brown, in a very interesting little book, has endorsed this separation. That intellectual analysis, discovery, critique and reflection are fundamentally different from political action and legislation. Even with the world in an emergency state, then, where we may want every scholarly hand on deck, it is essential to have a moat between academic and public life. I think there's a lot in that, but it's naive to imagine in an era of impact that historians can avoid engaging with that. We need to be realistic, but we also need to be quite sharp-eyed about what we are doing when we are licking honey from the razor's edge, as a Buddhist might say. There are costs from a disciplinary point of view of the sorts of things that get rewarded like that. And part of the point of offering, when you start going looking for impact, and part of the point of offering you this particular history is to suggest that no one would have, even if one was wanting to think about the Anthropocene, no one would necessarily have thought about starting by thinking about the land of Cockaigne. So on the eve of the COP28 summit starting in Dubai, what I hope I might have offered you is food for thought in terms of thinking about how we might engage with some of these larger questions, but also that we need to be very clear when we are engaging with them, in what capacity we are engaging with them, whether we are engaging with them as historians or whether we are engaging with them with respect to other skills that we might need to develop that we do not have at the moment. The histories I've offered, I hope, help to articulate the sorts of planetary humanisms that Paul Gilroy has encouraged us to think about, to help us thinking about what nourishing scholarship and teaching might be as we are working through the polar nights ahead of us. History may offer rather cold comforts in that respect, but I hope that it offers some comforts for you. Thank you very much.
It's an extraordinary and not a little daunting honour to be able to respond to John's incredible breadth of knowledge and engagement and ideas. An accompanying image to Cockaigne is the cornucopia, and we've just had a cornucopia intellectually and culturally that's taken us from some incredibly learned texts and theorists to Andy Stanton's Mr. Gum novels and computer games that we all love as well. And many, many things in between. In terms of the various things that John shared with us, there's a number of ways in which I want very briefly to respond. One is literally to share with John the thought that, as you picked up from the Hitchhiker's Guide bit, one of the things John likes is science fiction, at least occasionally, and I share that predilection. So Ian M. Banks's culture novels as another land of Cockaigne, a post-scarcity future in which all is a kind of utopia, but one in which things quite frequently go wrong because of other human propensities, and it's another way of us thinking our way through the implications of that recurrent human model of desire. I'm tempted to say cautiously, given other very eminent colleagues in the room, only a medievalist could have given this talk. That is not only in the sense that perhaps Meldenists might not have met Cockaigne in some of its manuscript traditions, but only a medievalist perhaps could come with the sense of the sort of breadth of time that can think about things, the Anthropocene in its full meaning, and the number of different possibilities of past human existence and past human imagination, bringing them to bear to help us think about the present. And I think a lot of us share moments in this present moment about wondering what our role is as humanities academics, that the world of impact doesn't on the whole make us feel terribly positive about that. It tends to make us feel inadequate to the wider needs of society beyond what is sort of counted by the Treasury as having some financial effect. But I think John has presented us with some wonderful ways of suggesting things that we can do, in bringing something to these conversations, in reflecting on the different ways in which human beings have dreamt about their worlds as well as the experience their worlds. Responding intellectually to things John's flagged up, I wanted to flag one other reworking of Cockaigne, which is the song The Big Rock Candy Mountain, which I didn't have time to Google to check, but I sort of assume comes out of Depression era American stuff. If you remember, the Big Rock Candy Mountain is, the cops have all got wooden legs and can't chase you, and if you go into prison, you can walk straight out, and you can eat everything in the landscape around you. It is Cockaigne, but one very clearly as a recompense for massive inequality and suffering in the moment that it's there. And I think one of the things that I would sort of, the next bit of the conversation I want to have with John is about the way in which the human motors of desire and the desire to take nature for granted is interwoven with the human propensities towards inequality, social economic inequality, and the ways in which perhaps trying to imagine better systems politically for ourselves might help us find better ways of addressing what it means to think about the planet as a common treasury for all, to quote another pre-modern phrase. I kind of also, I mean, this is just joie de vivre, thinking of other kind of medieval elements of medieval culture that may help us, that I as somebody who works on the European Middle Ages, and particularly its religious culture, but I'm not myself religious, I'm always struck by how attractive I find the notion of caritas, of the love for others that is within the Christian culture. And it seems to me one of the things we're trying to engender is a kind of caritas for the planet and ourselves within it, and an understanding of not love in the sense of sort of, fervent desire or emotional, but a recognition of the necessary interdependencies. And there's work that we can do there as well. I think as medievalists and medievalists who've gone through a pandemic, we're very aware of human fragility across time, but also I think of the human persistence. And I think that also I take great strength from John's different reflections on this dreaming about Cockaigne, in that I also think that as much as a lot of the world is depressing us, there's things that we can draw upon our shared heritage intellectually in this way. What I really want to do, though, in conclusion, is to say thanks to John, not only for this amazing lecture, but for all that he does as a historian and colleague. The shared joy of referencing things and bringing things into conjunction that is intellectually illuminating and also fun, that there is always laughter and always the propensity of us kind of sharing stuff that will make us smile and giggle in these different ways. And it's something that I've treasured particularly from John as an academic friend who I spend a lot of time with over the years, and hope to much longer as well. And I think John's not only his incredible intellectual strengths that we've seen here, and his ability to be kind of in a very positive sense omnivorous, but not disrespecting the environment that he sets out to eat, as it were. That one of the things that I think John gives to us, and certainly what I feel whenever I encounter John in his intellectual academic moment, is a challenge to myself to be a better historian, to be more ambitious in terms of the stuff that really matters, the attempt to reach out beyond one's own immediate comfort zone and make connections with others, and to think in an open and productive way collectively. And I think he's given us a fantastic basis for that this evening, and I hope that others feel it too. Lastly, John said that apparently I'm his fairy godfather. I cannot click my heels or whatever and send you all to the ball, but I can remind you that there are drinks and nibbles somewhere downstairs. And in that sense, at least, we will get to enjoy conviviality, if not endlessly, then at least briefly with each other. But can we end by again thanking John for an absolutely amazing